Hi, I'm Paul Feinberg, the host of the UCLA Anderson podcast, and I'm here today with Associate Professor Margaret Shih. Margaret, you've been studying stereotypes. Can you tell us a little bit about your work and about the paper you've recently published?
Sure. My work looks at stereotypes from the target's perspective. So looking at what people do when they find themselves in a position when they feel like they're being stereotyped. So for example, if you are the only woman in a boardroom and someone turns to you and asks you to get the coffee, the reason you give for their asking could change the way you feel about the people in the room and the orientation to the board meeting. So if you think that they asked you to get the coffee because you're a woman and women are stereotyped to be expected to get coffee, then you may attribute sexism to that statement. You may feel a little less warm towards the people in the room. But on the other hand, if you attribute they're asking you to get coffee because you happen to be the person that's closest to the door, then you may not have that same kind of reaction to that question.
I know you looked at how people scored on math tests and how those scores and their abilities related to their self-perception and some of the stereotypes common stereotypes they may have felt.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about the experiment itself?
Sure. In the study that I looked at, I examined how people react on a math test when different identities are made salient. And I specifically looked at Asian women. Asians are stereotyped to be good at math, women are stereotyped to be bad at math. And what we found is that when we ask Asian women to take a math test, when we make their female identity salient before they take the math test, they actually do worse on the math test than when we make no identity salient when they take the math test. And on the flip side, when we make their Asian identity salient and Asians are stereotyped to be strong at math, they do actually better on the math test. And this is surprising because you'd think that on a math test or in taking any kind of test, people would always do the best that they could do. But we're finding that if you make a positive stereotype salient, they actually get a boost in their performance.
Given what we've learned from your work, what are the implications? We're not going to all of a sudden eliminate stereotypes.
Right.
So how do you work with people to sort of deal with the existing stereotypes?
Well, one thing that my work shows is that people are always aware of stereotypes. Even if they're not consciously aware, the stereotypes are always in the background. So your behavior when you're in a position of being stereotyped doesn't only just reflect on you as an individual, but also your group. So, for example, the women in their math tests, if they perform poorly on the math test, they're not only performing poorly as who they are, like Joan, but they're also performing poorly as women. So there's a lot more implications. Stereotypes have more implications than what it says about the individual.
Okay, so armed with this knowledge, now there may be stereotypes about men, or I may be thinking people are thinking certain things about me based on my type. What do I do? How do I overcome performing to the stereotype if that stereotype is negative?
I think people are actually already very strategic about that. There are little cues that you may bring with you into a situation. So for example, if you happen to be a young professor, you may dress older to overcome the stereotype. Or if you are a woman, but you're also very strong quantitatively as an accountant, then you may emphasize your accountant identity over your female identity when you come into any social interactions. So people have many identities, so you just draw on the one that is most adaptive to the situation.
Were the results surprising to you? I mean, do you go into this thinking like this is what's going to happen and we're going to prove it, or do you do the experiment and then sort of say, oh, how interesting, these are the results?
Yeah, the results were very surprising to us, actually. There's been a lot of work that shows that negative stereotypes hurt performance. So that aspect of the study wasn't surprising. What was surprising was that positive stereotypes boosted performance. And as I said before, we were always expecting people to always do the best that they could. So the fact that people actually do a little better when you make a positive stereotype salient kind of blew us away. But this is actually a very robust findings. We found this study, the same effect with men in math performance, with student athletes. We found this study with African American women and verbal performance. So this has been replicated many times in our lab.
How do you use this research in your teaching? You know, what role does it play in the classroom?
Well, we teach this in Management 409, which is the organizational behavior course. I mean, it becomes very relevant as our corporations become multinational and our workforce becomes more diverse. So you have to figure out how to get people from different backgrounds to work together really well. And you know, there's a lot of stereotyping that goes on when you don't know anything else about the people around you. Then you just rely on visual cues, and so that can have an effect on how you interact with them. And making people more aware of this really enhances people teamwork and good social interactions.